Our JavaScript to the next level by seeing how we can not only just change the content of an element, but we can also append content to it, which means take whatever's there and then add some extra text to it. And we can make a whole element appear out of nothing. So let's get cracking. Let's add a second paragraph. And I'm going to put in the words JavaScript is, and then ... And we'll give this an ID of second paragraph. And here's a little challenge. Can you add some code and a second button so that when that second button is clicked, the content of this paragraph changes to hello Rob. So exactly like the first button behaves. So add a new button so that when you press that button, the content of this paragraph changes to hello Rob. Go for it. I hope you managed it. It's just a bit of copy and paste really is all we need. So let's copy the button code. I'm going to change text to append text. So append means adding something to the end of it. And we'll call this second button. Okay, let's just have a look. Okay, yep, that all looks fine. Obviously, append text at the moment doesn't do anything. So we need to set up some JavaScript to connect that to some code. So again, I'm going to copy and paste. And all we need to do is change the necessary bits so that it does what we want. So we want it so that when the second button is clicked, it updates the content of second paragraph to hello Rob. So second button, of course, has the ID of second button. So we want to make this function happen when second button is clicked. And we do that using document.getElementById second button .onClick equals and then function. So very quick question. What would happen if I ran this code now and then click the second button? What will happen? Hope you got it right. It should update hello world to hello Rob. There we go. It does. Because it's just doing the same thing as what the first button did, updating the element with ID text, which is this one, to hello Rob. So we wanted to make it so that it updated JavaScript is, and the ID for that paragraph is second paragraph. And that's it. So now it's going to update second paragraph to hello Rob with any luck. Fantastic. Okay, so that was the mini challenge and how I expected you to do it. Let's see how then we achieve what we originally wanted, which was how to append some content to this. So first off, the content that I want to append is going to be awesome. So we end up with JavaScript is awesome. The way I'm going to do it, and it's going to take quite a long line of text, so I'm just going to extend this out so we can do it all in one line, is by copying and pasting all of this and then popping it in there and adding a plus symbol. And before I explain how that works, just take a moment to have a look at that and see if you can work out why that will append awesome to the content of second paragraph. I hope you got it. What we're essentially doing here is we're taking the inner HTML of second paragraph, which is JavaScript is ... and then we're setting that equal to the inner HTML of second paragraph, which is JavaScript is, and then we're adding that to awesome, or we're adding awesome to that. So we're setting the inner HTML of the second paragraph to whatever it is plus the word awesome. So we're essentially adding the word awesome to the end, or in programming terms, we're appending the word awesome to whatever the content was before. So let's take a look, see if that does what we want. So refresh, append text, append text. And there we go. JavaScript is awesome. So another teeny challenge then, could you append something else to this line and make it so that it becomes, I think JavaScript is awesome. Go for it. All right, hope you managed that. All we need to do is, before we get the contents of second paragraph, we're going to add I think in double quotes with a space at the end, otherwise it's going to be all one word, and then a plus again. And this means I think, and then whatever the content is, and then the word awesome. So let's have a look. JavaScript is, and I think JavaScript is awesome. I agree. All right. So finally then, how could we make some content appear out of thin air, out of nowhere? And I'm actually going to set this as a challenge. See if you can figure it out. So how can we have no content here, just a button, and then when you click that button, you get some text, whatever you want that to be. Go for it. Did you manage it? Okay. It was a pretty tough challenge, but well done if you got there. The way I'm going to do it is have a paragraph with an ID of empty paragraph. And then that is, of course, just an empty paragraph. It's just blank. Nothing will display on the screen. And then I'm going to have a button with an ID of create paragraph. And then I'll have the words create text on it. And rather than copying and pasting this time, I'll create the code from scratch just to give us an opportunity to see it and talk it through once again. So we want something to happen when the button with ID create paragraph is clicked. So that means we need to get that button first off. And we do that using document to say that we want something within this document. And then we say we want to get the element by its ID. Then in brackets and quotes, we give the ID. So that's create paragraph. And then we set onClick to be a function. And then we have curly brackets in which we're going to put the code for our function. So that means whatever I write in here will happen when that button is clicked. And then all we need to do is make it so that we select the paragraph with ID empty paragraph and put some content in it. So it's exactly the same as what we had up here when we change the content. Just in this case, we're changing it from blank to some text. So let's see that in action. So document.getElementById, and the ID this time is empty paragraph. And then we want to set the inner HTML to, let's say, hi there. And that's it. Let's take a look. So refresh that. So create text. Nothing's happening. Let's have a look. Find out what's going wrong. There must be an error in my code somewhere. Maybe you can see what it is. But let's have a look at the console. Document.getElementID.innerHTML is not a function. Aha, of course. So line 42, this line here, what I've done, of course, as you probably noticed, was I tried to pass the string hi there to innerHTML. And as it says, innerHTML is not a function. It's a value. It's the content of empty paragraph. So what I should have done is set it equal to, and then hi there. All right, no worries. Good use of the console. Let's have another look. Create text now, and there it is. Brilliant. So we've created something from nothing there, which is particularly useful if you've got an error message or something you want to display to the user once they've done something. A very quick thing to say is that this can be any HTML. We've only used text so far, but you can put HTML right in here as well. So let's have a look now. We've created a heading. So you can put lists, you can put forms in there, you can put whole chunks of text if you want to. Any HTML will do. All right, I hope you enjoyed those challenges. We're going to have an even bigger challenge in the next video where we're going to create the first part of our reaction game that we'll make at the end of this section. And this first part is called Disappearing Circles. Just need to look at a couple of things before we can do our Disappearing Circles challenge. And that is how we can manipulate styles with JavaScript. So far, we've been manipulating content, mostly by changing this in HTML variable. But we can do the same with styles. So let's add a paragraph. I'll call it more text. And we'll have the very boring, this is some text. So that's not going to be styled at all. But let's create a button with an ID of style text. And we'll have the text style text on it. There we go. Obviously it doesn't do anything yet. But now let's add some code for that button. So in just the same way, document.get element by ID. And the element that we want to get is the style text button. And then we want to add an onClick function to that. So this is going to be a function with curly brackets. And then what we want to do is just add some style to the more text paragraph. So for example, we want to go through the process, get element by ID. And the element we want to get this time is more text. And then instead of inner HTML, we do style. And then, for example, if we want to change the color to red, we would have .style.color equals, and then, in quotes, red. Simple as that. Now let's have a look. Style text, it goes red. Fantastic. Changing the font size is very similar, but slightly trickier because it's not exactly the same. We don't use font size because we don't like that hyphen in the JavaScript. We just use font size instead. So that's using the capitalization similar to get element by ID, small f, but then capital S. And let's say we want to make it a font size of 50 pixels. Let's have a look. There we go. It's massive. And so feel free to play around with that and obviously combine several styles if you want by just having multiple commands like this. But the particular other one I want to show you, which we're going to be using in our disappearing circles challenge, is to make it disappear. And we can do that by setting the display property to none. So as you can imagine, that just sets the CSS display property to none, which effectively makes it disappear. Let's check it out. There we go. It's gone. So it's not even just disappeared, but it's actually been removed from the flow of the page, and so the button moves up as a result. So feel free to get creative and play around to see what styles you can affect with JavaScript, but we're going to go on now to our mini challenge, Disappearing Circles. Here we're going to have a quick challenge which will give you an opportunity to use the JavaScript you've learned so far, as well as force you to recall some of the CSS that we learned in the previous section. So get yourself back to just a blank HTML document with your script tags at the bottom. And then the challenge is, can you create a red, blue, and yellow circle all next to each other, and then set up JavaScript so that when any of those circles are clicked, it disappears. So that's a slight step forward from what we've seen so far. We haven't seen how to make anything disappear, but hopefully you can work it out. At the very least, get those circles up and see what you can make them do. Good luck. All right, I hope you managed it. There are, of course, several different ways to solve this problem, but I'm going to go for a similar way as to how we made some circles last time. So I'm going to have a div with a class of circle and an ID of red circle. And then I'm going to add the styles for that first off. So just in the usual way. There we go. So all of the circles are going to have certain styles in common. So that's why I'm doing that as a class. So we'll start off by setting the width to be, let's say, 200 pixels. We'll set the height to be 200 pixels as well. Then to make them circular, we'll set the border radius to 50%. I want them all in a row, so I'm going to make them float left. And finally, I want a bit of a gap between them, so I'm going to give them a margin of 50 pixels. Okay, and then the only thing different between them is going to be their color. So let's put in red circle first. And that, of course, is going to have a background color of red. So let's just check, make sure we've got a nice big red circle there. Wonderful. And then we'll just do the same for a blue circle and a yellow circle. Then I'm just going to copy and paste the styles for those. So for the blue circle, background color of blue, and yellow circle, background color of yellow. Wonderful. I think they are floating left, but they're going off the edge of the page. So let's change the width to 100 and see if we can get them all in a row. Almost. Okay, then let's change the margin right to being 50 pixels. There we go. Could even then make them a little bit bigger. Ah, not that big. Try 130. Lovely. So now we've got our circles. We've just got to create our little bit of interactivity. Now then, it's just a matter of writing a little bit of JavaScript. And that should all be fine. Let's start with the red circle. So we're going to want to add an onClick function to our element with an ID of red circle. And we want to make it so that when it's clicked, it disappears. So it should be fairly straightforward. Let's start with document to say that we want to access something in this document, and then good old getElementById. Then we give it the ID of red circle, and then onClick, and we're going to set that equal to a function which we'll define in the curly brackets, and all we want to do is find it again. So document.getElementById red dash circle, and then set the style dot display, and just as we did in the previous video, set that to none, and that should make it disappear. Let's have a look. Click. There it goes. All right, simple enough. Now let's do it for the other two. So this is going to be very, very similar. All we need to do is change yellow circle and yellow circle and blue circle, blue circle. And that will just apply the same code but to each circle. Blue goes, yellow goes, red goes. Whoops, when I don't right click it. All right, I hope you managed that challenge, and we're going to be coming back to this code when we create our reaction testing game at the end of this section. For now though, we're going to move on away from working with HTML elements. For now though, we're going to move on and away from HTML elements and look at some pure JavaScript, which will allow us to do much more powerful things in our web pages than what we've seen so far. And we're going to start that process by looking at variables, using JavaScript to interact with the page that the user is on. But there is a huge amount more that we can do with JavaScript. And we're going to start getting into that now by looking at a basic programming concept of variables. So first off, I'm going to clear all this content to get us back to a nice, clean, empty page. And let's have a quick look at what I mean by a variable. So if you think back to your school days, you might remember solving equations with x or y in them. In that case, both x and y were variables. They were letters that represented certain values. And that's what they are in JavaScript as well, and indeed in programming in general. So we might, for example, create a variable, which we do using the keyword var, and our variable might be called x, and we might set it equal to 5, for whatever reason. Simple as that. So now we've got our variable, which is called x, and it's equal to 5. We can prove that to ourselves by alerting the value of x. So notice I don't have quotes around my x this time. If I do that, it will just alert the letter x, but without quotes, it will alert the value of the variable x, which is 5. I can change the value of x whatever I like, and that will change. I can also update the value of x later on. It's not fixed. So if it starts off as 10, I can then later on just change x to be 20, for example. I don't have the var this time because I'm not defining x, I'm just changing its value. So if x is now 20, there we go. That's the value. I can also have non-numerical variables. So I might have the variable name and set it equal to Rob. Now, to tell the browser that this is a string, we put it in quotes, just like we have done with strings of letters all along. So let's have a look now and see what that gives us. Have a quick think. What should pop up? Of course, Rob. So variables are hugely powerful things, and we're going to use them throughout the rest of this course. But how might we use one to do something in a web page like the ones that we've been creating so far? Well, let's try this as an example, and I'll set it up as a mini challenge. Can you create a text input and then a button next to it which says change the text? That's it, a text input and a button next to it that says change the text. Go for it. All right, hope you got it. Pretty straightforward. We just used input, and then the default type is text, but I do like to specify anyway that we have a text input here. So there's our text input, and then next to it we're going to have a button with the value of change the text. And there we go. And of course it's still alerting Rob. Let's get rid of that for the moment. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a paragraph which just says this is some text. And then what we're going to set our little page up to do here is to allow the user to type whatever they want into the box. And then when we click that button, then whatever the user has typed in the box will replace this is some text down here. And we'll use a variable to do that. All right, so a little mini challenge for you. Can you make it so that when you click the change the text button, something happens? I don't care what it is. You can update some content, you can alert something, you can do whatever you like, but just make it so that when I click that button, something happens. Go for it. I wonder how creative you got there. I would start off by giving the button an ID. I'll call it text changer, like that. And then we need to get that button, and we do that in the now hopefully familiar way of document.getElement by ID. And then the ID is text changer. And then we want to set the onClick to a function which we'll define with some curly brackets. So my challenge just said do something, so we'll just say alert, hi Rob, for now, just to make sure that everything's connected up nicely. And I would recommend doing that when you're working through making a site and making interactive things. Just do it really step by step. Don't try and code everything in one go, because inevitably it won't work and then it'll take you ages to figure out what's wrong. But if you do it step by step, hopefully you'll make fewer mistakes. And if you do make mistakes, it'll be a lot easier to see where those mistakes are. Right. So now what I'm going to do is get the value of our text input. And the value is going to be whatever the user has typed into it. So I'm going to set up a variable. I'll call it text entered, like that. And I'm using the same capitalization convention, so small letters all the way through, except for the beginning letters of the second and future words. And initially, I'm going to set it to an empty string like that. So this tells the browser that we want this to be a string, but initially it's empty, just like the box is initially empty. But then I'm going to take text entered and set it to the value of whatever the user has typed in the box. And to do that, I need to set an ID for my input. I'll just use text input. And now I want to get the value of text input. So I do that using document.getElementById. by ID. Text input is the ID. And then I want to get the value of that. Simple as that. So this will give us the value that the user has typed into that box. And just to check, let's alert its value. Just to take a look. So I'm just going to put ASDF in there. And there we go. So we've taken our variable, we've created it, and then we've set it equal to the value of the input, which is just whatever the user has typed. So final challenge then. Can you change the last line of our code so that instead of alerting text entered, it sets the value of this paragraph, or the inner HTML, I should say, of this paragraph to whatever the user has typed in? Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. I'm going to give our paragraph an ID, and I'll just call it text. And then once again, we're going to get that in the usual way. And we're going to set its inner HTML to be equal to text entered. There we go. Simple as that. So let's run this again. Type in some text, change the text, and there we go. So this is a very basic usage of variables to allow us to add another level of interactivity in our page. So we're not just clicking buttons and doing something, but we're actually allowing the user to type in something and then getting the results and doing something with them on our page. So variables open up a whole new world of power and interactivity that we can create with our websites. Variables, we saw how we could create something which contained a value, and then we could change that value later on and use it in our code to achieve something. Arrays take variables one step further and allow us to store a number of different values in one object. Now that sounds a bit weird until you've seen it in action. So let's just tidy things up a little and create an array. There's a few different ways of creating arrays in JavaScript. I'm going to show you the most common ones here. We actually use the keyword var as before to create them. So arrays are just variables, but different types of variables. And we'll call it my array. And then to tell JavaScript that we want to create an array, we use the command new and then array. And we use parentheses because this is a function which creates an array for us. So now we've got an empty array and we want to fill it with some values. So let's say we want to store some food items in this particular array for some reason. What we would do is we would take my array and specify which entry in the array we wanted to edit. And we normally start with 0. So arrays start at 0. So my array and then square brackets 0. And then we might set that equal to pizza. So just in the same way that we set the value of a variable, we can set the value of one item within an array. So my array 0 is now pizza. Can you set my array 1 to chocolate? Go for it. Let's have a look. You should have done something like my array square brackets 1 is equal to chocolate. There we go. So how do we get those values if we want them? Well, just in the same way that we worked with variables in the previous video. So if we want to get pizza, we could alert my array 0. Just like that. Let's refresh, and then we've got pizza there. Note, if we want to view a whole array, that's not that easy to do within the page itself, but it's very easy to do within the console. So that's how I'd recommend, if you want to check what the values of an array are while you're coding, then you can use the console log. And this is a very useful thing in general. It essentially allows you to leave comments for yourself as you're developing your app, which can help you with debugging or just generally seeing what's going on. And if we want to log the values within an array, we just console.log and then my array in parentheses. And let's then have a look. Obviously that doesn't display anything on the page itself, but if we right click, control click, and inspect, and then click on the console, it should show us, there we go. So it's array, it's got 2 values in it, and those 2 values are pizza and chocolate. Notice also we've got the length of the array, which is 2. And that's a very useful number to know how many items there are in your array, and we can get them just by using myArray.length. So that will tell us how many items there are in the array. If we have a look at that, you can see we just get returned 2 because we've got 2 items in our array here. All right, so that's all well and good, you might think, but why on earth would I need one of these? Why can't I just store these in individual variables? Well, imagine you're making something like a Twitter clone and you wanted to display a user's tweets. As you're writing the program, you don't know in advance how many tweets there are going to be because the number is going to change. Also, you definitely don't want to define a new variable for each tweet because you're going to have to come up with a huge number of variable names. That would be a very messy way to work with things. So instead, what you could do is create an array, which we might call tweets. And we're going to create this in a different way just so that you can see a different way to create an array. So instead of using new array, we can actually just assign the values of the array right at the start. So incidentally, just a pair of square brackets there will create an empty array. So it does the same thing as that line. But if we want to put some values in, we might have, what's the sort of thing people might tweet? Morning, everybody, something like that. And they might say, I love coffee, that kind of thing. What a Twitter feed this would be. So now what we've got here is 2 tweets within our tweets array. And hopefully this gives you a bit of a clue as to why arrays are so powerful. Because we could add as many tweets as we wanted to this array, display them all, we could delete ones, we can edit them, but we only have a single variable name to deal with. And it kind of makes sense. It's just a single variable called tweets. We don't need a different variable name for each of these because they're all tweets. So pretty much any web app you could imagine is going to need arrays to store lists of data. So you think of an email client, for example, has to store the user's contacts, the user's emails, and all sorts of other information that you don't know how many items there are going to be. And in that situation, arrays are perfect. So it's a very quick challenge. Can you alert the I love coffee tweet? Just to make sure that you've got the hang of how arrays work. Go for it. All right, hope you did it. Pretty easy. just alert, and then we want tweets 1. That was the only slight trick. You might have forgotten that arrays start at 0 and thought that that was number 1, and then attempted to alert tweets 2, and then got an error because tweets 2 doesn't exist. So this is tweets 0, and I love coffee is tweets 1. Let's just have a look. There we go. Brilliant. So what if we want to add a third tweet to our list? So our user has just come along and tweeted something just as exciting as these 2 tweets, and we want to add it to their list of tweets. That's pretty easy. We can use the command push. So tweets.push will add a third item to this array at the end of the array. And then we give the value that we want to add onto the end of our tweets array. So what's the sort of thing this guy might say? Maybe something like back to work, because he's hilarious. So that will add back to work onto the end of the array. So very quickly, can you log to the console the tweets array so we can have a look and see what's inside it now? Hope you remembered that it's just console.log and then whatever we want to log. So in this case, the tweets array. So let's take a look, refresh the page, and then Control or right click and inspect. And there we go. So there's our array. It's got a length of 3, so 3 items in it. Morning everybody, I love coffee, and back to work. Fantastic. What about removing items from arrays? That's pretty easy to do as well. We've got a command for it within JavaScript. And this is splice, which allows us to do actually a lot more than just deleting, but I'll show you how we can get rid of one of these tweets. So let's, for example, decide that our tweeter decides that his I love coffee tweet was rather inane and wanted to delete it. Then we would give the splice command 2 variables. Firstly, the number of the item in the array that we wanted to start deleting. So remember, morning everybody is the 0th item, I love coffee is number 1, and back to work is number 2, just as it says over here on the left. So if I wanted to delete I love coffee, we'd start at number 1, because I love coffee is number 1. And then if we just wanted to delete that one, then we would say I want to delete 1 tweet starting at item 1. So that should delete just I love coffee. And there we go. Now you can see we've got left morning everybody and back to work. So what we're doing here is we're passing 2 variables to this splice function, and they give the function a bit of information. So it says start deleting at item number 1 and delete 1 item. So can you change our splice function so that we delete both I love coffee and back to work? How would we do that? All right, hope you got it. All we need to do is change the second number to a 2, and that will then instruct it to delete 2 items starting at item number 1. So let's have a look. We should just be left with morning everybody. Perfect. We can also use the splice function to add in items. So let's say we wanted to add in a tweet before I love coffee. Then what we would do is we say, I want to add my new tweet at number 1. I don't want to delete any tweets. And the content of the new tweet that I want to add in is, I don't know, cornflakes for breakfast. And of course, the requisite exclamation mark. So this should add in the item cornflakes for breakfast just before item number 1. Let's have a look. There we go. So now we've got morning everybody, cornflakes for breakfast, I love coffee, and back to work. Very quick challenge for you. How could you change splice now to, instead of just adding in cornflakes for breakfast, replace I love coffee with cornflakes for breakfast? Go for it. Did you manage it? It's actually pretty straightforward. We just change the 0 to a 1. And this will mean we want to add in a new item before tweet number 1, but we also want to delete tweet number 1 and then add in cornflakes for breakfast. So we should now have just 3 tweets without I love coffee. There you go. And you can add in as many items as you like here as well. As many inane tweets as you can imagine, just by separating them with commas. So if our tweeter felt that cornflakes for breakfast wasn't enough information, he might add a num num tweet immediately after. Let's have a look. There we go. So we've now got morning everybody, cornflakes for breakfast, num num, and back to work. Alright, there's a huge amount more that you can do with arrays, but that's as far as we're going to go for now, because I don't want you to have to memorize lots of different array functions, but as we need them, we'll come back to them and see what else we can do with arrays. You'll notice that what we've got here is pure code. We don't actually have any content in our page at all. And increasingly in the JavaScript section and the next section, we're going to be looking at more complex code to do more advanced things. And this is really what programming or coding is all about. It's not so much about the layout of your page as the logic behind it. And that's where things get really powerful and I think really exciting. And talking of logic, we're going to learn our first logic command in the next video, and that is the if statement. See you there. In previous videos, we saw the 2 basic ways to store information in JavaScript using variables and arrays. In the next few videos, we're going to see how we can use JavaScript to affect the logic of the application, i.e. what it does. The code that we've written so far is going to do the same thing every time. But what if we want our code to do different things depending on different situations? Well, for that, we'd use an if statement. So let's get rid of the code we've got so far. And can you set up a variable for me called x with a value of 1? Go for it. Hope you managed that. Var to create a variable, x to name the variable, and then equals 1 to give it that value. So what we're going to do with this is create an if statement which depends on the value of x. And this looks like this. So we start with if, and then in parentheses, we put our condition that we want to be true. And I'm going to test for whether or not x is equal to 1. That might seem a bit crazy when I know that x is equal to 1, but just stay with me for the moment. Now we test whether x is equal to 1 using x and then double equals 1. Now that can be quite confusing for new programmers, but it actually makes a lot of sense. When you see a single equals in a program, it means that you're setting the value of something to something else. When you see a double equals, it means we're testing whether or not those two things are the same. So it's a logical difference, and therefore there's a different symbol. So it's 2 equal signs. But it is a very common beginner mistake to just put 1 equals sign there, and then what you'll find is this will set x is equal to 1 and say that the statement is true, which is very rarely what you want to happen. So always put 2 equals signs in an if statement. And then, just like with functions that we saw a few videos ago, we have curly brackets to contain whatever code we want to happen if x is 1. So we might, for example, just alert x is 1. Hurrah! So let's just check. See what happens. X is indeed 1. What would happen then in this program if I changed x to be 2? What would happen when I run it? I hope you got the answer, which is absolutely nothing, because x is not 1 anymore, so it's not going to alert that. We can actually have an else statement at the end of our if statement, which will do something if this is not true. So if x is 1, then we're going to alert that. If it's not, we'll alert x is not 1. Simple as that. So now when we run it, we get x is not 1. And of course, if we change it back to 1, we'll get x is equal to 1. So this is obviously a very simplistic example and may seem a little bit inane. So let's try and link it with something that we might have in a real web page. So something that almost every web app needs to do at some point is to log you in. And obviously, if statements are absolutely crucial to that. So you're going to expect the user to enter username and password, and then you're going to use an if statement to see if the username is correct and the password is correct, then log the user in. If not, give them some sort of error message. So we're going to create a very minimal login system, and I'm actually going to set you this as a challenge. So rather than have a username and a password, we're going to have a magic word. Now you can set that magic word to be whatever you like, but what I want is for our page to say what is the magic word, and then have a text input for the user to enter it, and a button when they're done, and then an alert to tell them whether or not they've got it right. Simple as that. Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. So let's have a paragraph tag saying what is the magic word. And then on the next line, we'll have an input with a type of text and an ID of magic word. And then on the final line, we'll have our button with an ID of check magic word, because that's what we're going to do when the button is pressed. And we'll have enter on our button. There we go. Oh yeah, and we've still got our code running, so X is still 1. Excellent. That looks good. So now we've written the content of our page. Let's write the logic. So we only want our logic to happen when the button is pressed. So we know how to do that now, hopefully. Document.getElementById. The ID of the button is check magic word. And we want to set onClick to be equal to a function that we're going to make. And then we put that function in curly brackets. So first off, as always, I'm just going to alert something just to make sure that everything's connected up right. There we go. So definitely recommend always writing your JavaScript step by step like this, not doing it all in one go. So now what we're going to need to do is get the value of whatever the user has typed so we can check it against our magic word. So let's create a variable for that. And I'm going to call it magic word entered. And I'm going to set that equal to the value of this text input. So remember, the text input has an ID of magic word. So we'll use document.getElementById magic word, and we want to get the value of that. So as we did in the previous video, dot value to get the value of that. And once again, because I like things happening really step by step, I'm just going to alert the value of that to make sure that everything once again is wired up correctly. So let's just put in ASDF, ASDF. Brilliant. Step by step, you're much less likely to go wrong, much easier to fix it if you do go wrong. All right, the second variable I'm going to create is the actual magic word, because I want to keep this not kind of embedded deeply in my code. I might want to change it at some point. So I'm going to have abracadabra as my magic word for obvious reasons. And now what we want to do is set up our if statement. And it's pretty straightforward, hopefully. So if, and then parentheses. So if magic word entered is equal to, and remember we need the double equals because we're checking whether or not it's equal to rather than setting it equal to. So if that's equal to magic word, we'll just alert something like, you got it. And then obviously, if this was a real kind of web page, we'd add some logic for either logging the user in or doing whatever it is that this page is supposed to do when the user gets the magic word correct. And if it's not, we'll alert, nope, try again. There we go. So that should do it. Let's find out. So let's get it right first off. Abracadabra. Enter. You got it. Fantastic. And then if we enter anything else. Nope. Try again. Brilliant. So I hope you managed to do that more or less by yourself. Hopefully this gives you a clear idea of why if statements are so important. Essentially, they allow us to do something on a certain condition happening. And that's absolutely central to the idea of programming. And in fact, now that we know about if statements, we're capable of building some basic JavaScript games. And we're going to do that in the next video, where we'll make a simple game called How Many Fingers?